Hello, everybody. Okay, today will be the first in a four-part video series of mine where I basically am going to explain the kits of every single Awaker in the game divided by realm. Today we're starting with the kit I am most familiar with, which is going to be the Aequor units. And what we're basically going over is what the cards do, what their exalts do, what the Enlightens do, and also just general gameplay patterns slash tips, like why are they on your team, etc. And without further ado, we might as well just get into it. I'm going to start on the standards and then go into the limited. And so the first standard we're going to look at is Kaikis, just because he is earliest in my order of owned Awaker. So for Kaikis, you start with the Enlightens. You're going to want his E3, especially in the early game. The 7% of his con, which is his health-related stat over here, is very good early game. It's assuming you only even have 100 when he's much lower level than yours. You're getting 7 HP a turn when mobs do only like 20 damage or so. So it is just solid sustain overall. And a part of the reason you care about it a lot is also because you want these other two effects that he gives you. With his 2 costs, his Shatter Halberd actually giving him Exalt Charge, and his 3 costs just having more shield and being able to hold on to it. All these are very important enlightens for how his kit functions. Later on in endgame content, you're going to want him at OE just basically to have it for Alien Miscap. You're never actually going to press his Overexalt button. You only ever just use it for the increased Alien Miss overflow. Now, as far as the actual kit itself, we're going to lead on his most important aspect, which is going to be his Exalt, which is a multiple effect that it does, but the main important one is the heal, the weakness dispel, and most of all, the vulnerable. And basically, you're just going to use this right before you burst down your bosses and mobs, all that, to apply a stack of vulnerable to cleanse any damage debuffs you're going to have. That's what the dispel weakness is for. And as well as gain a little bit more tentacle damage, a little bit more HP, you know. Very good effects. Other than that, notable cards are his 2 costs, which the Rouse, which will heal him every time you play a card and will give him a little bit of counter. This will fall off very much in endgame content, but early on, you definitely want to rouse him up to start getting those scalings, those stacking, those healing. All those effects are really good early game. And as far as all that's left from him, really, is that you play his 2-cost card that gives you counter equal to 50% of the damage you do. So if his 2 cost is doing like 200 damage, you are getting 100 stacks of counter, and it only goes up and up and up. So with Kaikis, with his 2 costs, you very much want to be doing damage. And ways of doing that is you can run the Steppenwolf Covenant set, which both increases your counter gen as well as increases the damage. And, you know, just generalized damage increasing effects. His kit also does scale with Sigil yield. He is a unit that cares about that stat, so stacking Sigil yield effects on him is also a good idea. And as far as the last card we're really going to look at here is going to be his Protective Sea, which is his 3 cost, and what's most notable about it is that it causes all your counter effects at end of turn, or rather I should say when you get hit, to trigger an additional time. And this effect can't stack. So if you're running a like Hamlin or Stellar Brew Relic in Arc 1 or just any card duplicating effect, this does work with it, and you can cause your like 200 to 1000 to 10k counter to be triggering twice or even 3 times per hit, which obviously can be very, very important and can easily kill a multi-hitting enemy. And next we're going to look at Goliath. And Goliath is very simple. He is all about increasing damage. So looking at his Exalt, you see that he has Usurp and Dormancy. and he places 3 derived cards into your hand. So dormancy is what we care about. The 2 options will appear on the left and right. You basically always pick the right option, and what that does is give you temporary strength equal to at max level 60% of your permanent strength, or like some bonus like that, or current strength, I should say. A very big strength bonus, basically. And that he also adds these 3 2-cost cards into your hand that will basically serve as damaging cards and do AoE damage. What's important in what I just said there is that the Dormancy Exalt effect is used in tandem with current strength. It's not based around permanent strength. So you can stack the damage from it with his Law of the Strong, for example, which I will explain later in a minute, and then things like Tulu Exalt, Memory Rondos from Hamlin, basically anything that increases your strength, even temporarily. If you activate it all before activating his Exalt, you're looking at maximum potential damage. The most important of which, as we see with his most important Enlighten, Law of the E2, which will give your Law of the Strong the ability to steal strength from mobs, is going to be his Law of the Strong. Because what this says is that it will give you a little bit of permanent strength, but also will take any strength stacks that mobs will have and give them to you for the turn. And there's a lot of mobs in this game that do stack strength. There's a lot that don't, but when you're playing with Goliath, you really do want to look at what mobs do stack strength, and when preparing for your burst turn, play that Law of the Strong into the Goliath Exalt. Because instead of gaining like maybe 40 strength from Goliath Exalt, you can gain easily like 100. Or for most players in later content, it goes from 100 strength Exalt to up to even 400 if you lead on that Law of the Strong, because you have so much strength already, and it scales with the amount of strength you have. And other than that, there's not much to talk about, because despite his appearances, Goliath is actually not a DPS. He is a Exalt strength support bot. The reason why he's powerful is because of the lines of play I just described. Just gaining 200, 300 strength for your burst turn with an actual DPS is going to be extremely powerful. None of his other cards are really that relevant. And then that Law of the Strong being able to steal strength is the big thing. And then the only other really relevant aspect of his kit is these numbers right here. He has some of the highest stats, just raw stats, of any Awakener in the game. So you'll have super high con with him. He can hit very hard if you do end up playing one of his offensive cards that's just a finisher, and effects like that. And this going to lead us to Celeste, which is the opposite of Goliath in many ways. Where Goliath is a very aggressive support, Celeste is a very defensive support. You'll see already that her stats are very low, and that doesn't really matter as much. Normally, the con value, for example, is very, very important on teams, but with Celeste specifically, it actually is not that important. And the reason why is because of this effect right here. It's tied to her Exalt, but what it does is that you get a bonus life. So if you were going to take damage that would kill you, you instead get to revive at a certain amount of HP, scaling with the level of her Exalt. So you'll see I don't really play her too much, but she is a very powerful Exalt Awakener, and in fact I will just level that up now, actually, because I do have just the spare mats. And so that is basically what she's here for. In basically all content, she exists to do 2 things. Exalt, which will not only give you that bonus life, it also will give you a bonus Aerith for the turn, and can dispel the Blighten state, which is the anti-heal state. So if you are finding yourself to be getting into that anti-heal state, you can sub in Celeste to remove it. Otherwise, the most relevant effects from her are going to be the Tintless and Everlasting Dream, which are cards that you can just hold on to when you have her up to that Enlighten 3. Because I believe it is the Enlighten 2 that will give you... Yes, both the Enlighten 1 and 2 of hers gives you the ability to hold on to those two cards, and they will have scaling healing, which truthfully the numbers of the scaling are relatively low, but it's just the ability to hold on to them that is very valuable. And so that is another reason why you really want that Enlighten 3 on her, because all three of those Enlightens are very important for her kit to fully function. And while I got a little sidetracked, what they do is the Tinless Stream effectively can be used to give you an extra mana for the turn, like her Exalt does as well. And it also has the very niche case of being able to cleanse any sluggish debuff you have. Sluggish being the debuff that causes you to have your cards be more expensive. The purple one. You will see from time to time. Then her 3 cost for Everlasting is mostly just used to apply weakness for a turn. Weakness obviously being a very significant debuff for defensive reasons. You'll hear me talk about it again and again throughout the videos that I'm series, most likely, because it is just that important. Any Awaker that has weakness in their kit has proven to be a powerful Awaker just for that. Because the ability to apply weakness is very important in most, if not all, content. Since weakness is a 20% damage reduction. And so next we're going to look at Pharos. And Pharos specifically, if you're truly wanting to get the most out of this character's kit, if you're trying to make Pharos into like a powerful unit, if you're trying to play around Pharos, what you really want is to get her up to Enlighten 3. Because once you have her at Enlighten 3, you will have Alienist regeneration every turn for every card in hand. And nowadays, most comps will have a good amount of cards in hand. They'll have like around 7 minimum, right, at the end of turn. On average. So that's 20%, that's 20 Alienist at end of turn. And that is a very nice charge, because this character's real power is in the Alienist, is in her Exalt. Because her Exalt does a couple things that are really good. One is she can dispel Vulnerable. And so if you ever do need to dispel Vulnerable, you have access to it. And then otherwise, she can gain a shield, which is also very good, especially when you level it up a bit. Obviously, just really high shield values. For example, at level 145 is a really solid shield value. And it will, if you level it, invest in it, it's going to be really strong. But more importantly is that you are able to grab cards from your draw pile, and basically she serves as a tutor. So she's very good early game when you don't have a lot of powerful draw or something, or your comp's a little weaker, so you need to play cards a bit more effectively. Pharos is a really nice unit, if generally speaking, you're just trying to draw cards. So you don't really play any of her cards themselves. Another reason why the Enlighten is so powerful is because you're able to get those cards that you're trying to draw. Well, you're able to get her Exalt with the Enlightened in order to play those cards. Other than that, really, other than her just being a draw bot, the fact that she does trigger poison for each card in hand, like being able to trigger 20%, can be also a nice little addition into a poison comp, especially since with the draw as well, it can be quite solid before you have a more powerful unit to replace her. She's a very solid budget unit, and that's where you would most likely want to use her. And so next is going to be Sangha. And Sangha is a very interesting unit, because you're only going to see her in 1 of 2 places. Either in endgame, as like one of the weaker carries with a lot of investment, or at the very, very early game as like a shielder and just general good unit. And so for Sangha to function, you really are going to want her, or like the most ideal situation for Sangha is to have her up to this OE, because all her entire kit skills with shielding. She's a shield based character. She's a warden, which means she cares about shielding. And this one specifically, her Overexalt is that she gets 200% shield from the Overexalt, but also it does bonus shield damage, both her strike and her Exalt when she Overexalts for the turn. So while early on you only ever use her as a shielder just to apply occasional shields, late game she is a shield-based DPS carry that tries to stall, gain extremely high shield values, and then use this overexalt as well as her strike, because this strike will have like 2k damage, 4k damage with the post overexalt, because that damage will be scaling with the shield she has. And you'll notice that like her exalt itself, what it is, it's just an AoE shield plus damage with like scaling damage values. You really don't play her for anything else. You're either only ever putting her into like as a plus 12 endgame unit, or really plus 4 minimum for that OE, or as a just even E0 just very early unit strength, the shielding strength. And so that's it for the normal standard Awakers in Aequor. What we have left now are the 3 limiteds and the welfare unit. Welfare being a unit you progress over time in your account by buying the, in this case, Pearl duplicate from the Pearl duplicate shops. I'll show you that actually right now. So there's 3 characters in this game that you can get their shards from here. It's Aegis, who's a Karo, Erica, who's Ultra, and then Orita. And so for what does Orita's kit do is that she is a DPS, and it's really unfortunate that she is a welfare unit, because her kit really does not function much well outside of that OE. Because, not necessarily because of this, even though this effect is very powerful. You probably most do want this for her damage. It's mostly because her line is that she wants to gain Aliamus so she can exalt, so then she can then play more cards, and so she can exalt again. She wants to exalt multiple times in a fight, and or just get up to that really big overexalt. Otherwise, she is an incredibly, incredibly slow unit. She just does not perform very effectively as a DPS pre-OE. And as far as the kit itself, this one is probably the most complicated Aequor kit, because Aequor is a relatively simple class in general. But what you do with it is that you play these gland divisions and her rouse, which creates more gland divisions. And then these gland divisions are then used to deal damage and gain Aliamus. So this card, what it does is that it's a 0 cost card that when played duplicates itself, and then when discarded generates Aliamus for Orita. That's how you gain her Exalt, is that you generate multiple one of these, and then you discard them. Well, how do you discard them? There is the Posse Encounter in Pure White, which says discard your hand, draw your hand size +2. And then also a main card of her kit, the Power of Friendship. The Power of Friendship The Power of Friendship doesn't just add a gland division into your deck, it also just refreshes your whole hand, which allows you to discard, say, like 6 glands at once. You'll get half an alien, half an exalt bar, and then you'll be able to exalt with her. And because what her exalt does is that it eats every single gland in your deck and does a hit per gland. And since Red Stance procs a tentacle swing every time you do a hit, what this character, her loop is, you have all these glands, you exalt on her, she does like 20 hits, you place, each of which does damage, and then plus the tentacle damage, you place multiple you place 2 gland divisions in your hand, you can get to play those out as well, and it's over, and you just have this loop where you're trying to generate glands to charge up the exalt, to then exalt to then stack all those tentacle hits and stuff. So that is the generalized kit, just like gameplay loop with her. And ideally, what you do is you stack before her Exalt. You try to stack as much tentacle strength and tentacle damage as possible. And so, for doing that, there's a couple ways, which leads us into, we'll call them the year 1 limiteds, but basically the ones that came out before Arc 1 existed, and the best of which being Tulu. Tulu being at one point considered the best Awaker when he first came out, probably because he was also the first limited Awaker. And as I was talking about the Rita and Goliath and all of them being like, you want high numbers, you want high strength. Well, what does Tulu do? His Enlighten, well, his Exalt, I mean, is that he gives you temporary strength. And so for this character, you're going to want him at one of two Enlightens. If you are a new player, if you're in the early game, you're going to want him at E1. Because what E1 gives you is it buffs his forecast card. Specifically, it turns it from a weak DPSing option to a very, very effective mob clearing option, because it gives his forecast card called Abyss Order the ability to hit everything on the stage with the tentacles. So it just turns it into an act clear machine. The second effect of it, which reduces the cost while you're in the white stance, is not as relevant because the shielding is very inefficient and it's more important to be dealing the damage. So what does his kit do specifically? The cards that matter is that the strength and defense will, if played, will give temporary strength, which is nice if you have the Aerith for it. But what's really nice about his kit is that you can also just discard all his cards because they all have Aftershock Command of Tentacle. So even if you're not playing them, they're still getting value. Granted, they're better that way when he does not have the E2, because the E2 is what gives them the temporary strength. So, other than that, when Lemurian calls, his 3 costs can be used in white stance as a defensive option in order to reduce the strength of mobs when they're attacking. Basically only best used when you're facing a multi-hit, because that basically doubles, triples, or multiplies the damage being reduced by however much that mob is attacking. The Abyss Order itself obviously being his main DPS option, which is just a big tentacle slam on all enemies. And the reason why I don't talk about his Rouse here is because while the Rouse is nice, it gives you strength every time you play or discard a Tulu card, it doesn't come up very often. Early game, yeah, it's going to be good for you to pick it up if you're running a Tulu team, but late game, it's usually not very viable, especially since it's a 3 cost, it's very expensive. And so I mentioned earlier that early game you want to make one, but you want to get a different Enlighten level late game. That Enlighten level is Over Exalt. Over Exalt is very important for Tulu comps to work because his Over Exalt, which I don't have unfortunately, causes all his tentacles to attack twice that turn, and also gives him a lot more just general damage. And so the idea with Tulu is that you Exalt with him, gain a lot of strength, and then usually you have a different Aequor unit that is dealing a lot of the damage with their cards. Or if you're early enough in the game, you're just going to slam an Abyss Order and clear like mobs or whatever, or even bosses still going to be doing significant damage to it. Endgame, you get that Over Exalt. You'll stack up your tentacles to be doing like 50k damage or some absurd number, and then they'll do that like 2-3 times plus crit damage, and you're looking at up to millions of damage with just tentacles effectively when looking at the end. So a very, very good Exalt unit, a very powerful tentacle buffer, and just a very nice unit overall. So instead of a offensive unit, we're going to look at another limited that is much more defensive, the reverse. And that's going to be our lovely little Murphy here, who has her cute little Halloween skin she just got. So Murphy, as you can see here, is a warden. Very, very defensive unit. And she is just like Tulu, actually. Just the reverse. Because she also wants her E1 and then her Overexalt in endgame. The reason why you want her at E1 is because it gives her 3-cost card Retain. The other effect is very important for like her card's damage, but it's really always there for the Retain. Because what is Murphy's kit? Murphy's kit is Sacrifice. Murphy has her Exalt and her 0-cost card that will apply this debuff to you that causes you to take a percentage amount of your max health and damage. I say a percentage because the 0-cost gives you a temporary shield. Well, gives you shielding, which is temporary, and applies a 5% plus, for me, 26 sacrifice stacks onto your character. Sacrifice being a dot hit that will damage you and then get cut in half and damage you again next turn, etc., etc. And so while she applies these really nice shields with this, and then with her Exalt that cuts all damage in half, but you take half that much in as sacrifice, as well as gaining shield, you need a way of cleansing that, and that's where the Vortex comes in. Because the Vortex, at max level, cleanses half your sacrifice stacks, and it starts, I think, around 40%. And so the loop with her is to get the sacrifice, because you're blocking a big hit, and then to then cleanse it all with the Vortex. That's why the Retain is important, because you want to have that Vortex the following turn in order to cleanse it. The other effects don't really matter so much. And so why does she need OE for endgame? Well, like I said, you're gaining a bunch of sacrifice the turn after you block that big hit. So you're also going to want a lot of block the next turn, and that's what this Overexalt provides. Also, just the generalized fact of when you're playing a unit to Exalt like this, like with Tulu and all that, you're not necessarily exalting on them when you get it up. And so it is better to have the Alien Mist Overflow at the very least, because then you're just stacking up naturally anyways. And as you can see here, it gives her a very big shield the next turn in order to help block the sacrifice damage, as well as any damage that they might be attacking, because mobs don't just hit you once and then stop for a turn, right? And so we have 2 more left for Aequor. We have the last of the Arc 1 Limiteds today, the last of the Year 1 Limiteds. And so recently they got an announcement. Every unit that I have mentioned so far, other than Arita, because of her unique being welfare, will be available to be pulled from in the standard banners. The Miriam and the last 2 I just said, Tulu and Murphy, will not be selectable most likely, but they will all be acquirable in the standard banner as of November 17th, the anniversary event. And so Miriam, if we have Tulu as the shielder, as the DPS, and we have Murphy as the shielder, Miriam is the chorus, is just the pure support. And you want her at E2, really. Her OE is nice just for Alien Mist Overflow, but the most important Enlighten you have for her can be her Enlighten 2. Because, as I've said it before, Retain is very important. It gives one of her cards Retain. It gives her 3-cost card, Retain and Prepare. Prepare is like Retain, except for it reduces the cost usually by 1 at the end of the turn. I say usually because Miriam over here also has a Rouse that is very powerful, and her Rouse has effectively Prepare 3, which means the cost gets reduced by 3 at the end of the turn instead of just 1. Excuse me. And so for her, the effects that matter are going to be her Exalt, her Rouse, and her 3-cost Chosen card. As I said before, these 2 cards have Prepare. The Chosen is just this huge Alien Mist battery for units. You can hold on to it until you have spare Aerith for like a 1 or 2 cost, or when you can get it down to 0 cost, and then just recharge a unit or just charge up a unit for the first time with a very powerful injection of Alienus with this card. And then other than that, you're basically just going to be spamming her Rouse card and her Exalt. Because what her Rouse card does is that it has 3 states. You play it once, you get it back into your hand, and then you play it again, and then again. And so the first time you play it, you don't get a powerful bonus. The first bonus you get from it doesn't matter. The second time you get it, it's going to cost 6, but it has the prepare 3, so it's going to cost is going to go down. And when you play it, you'll be given an option of 2 choices. One is that you get scaling strength per turn, or you can have an injection of shield at the beginning of the turn. You always pick the strength option, because that is just permanent scaling infinite damage for the fight. And eventually that can stack up to just be, absurd numbers of damage, theoretically, if you can if you have infinite time, it's infinite scaling, basically, But it just is increased damage. And then you'll get it back into hand after playing it like that, and it'll cost 9, so that way you have to wait 2 turns for the prepare to go all the way down. And that effect is going to be, from that point on, from that turn onwards, after you've played this card, you get a 0 cost card in your hand that has one of 3 effects, but it will always give you 25 alien miss on a unit. So you'll have a 0 cost, give a unit 25 alien miss card, which is just even more Exalt charge. Alien miss being Exalt charge. But it also is going to roll randomly a choice of +2 Aerith, weakness or vuln application, or draw 2 cards. So once you've gotten that Rouse card to be fully played, every turn you're getting this very, very powerful support effect where you can either get weakness or Aerith or draw whatever you need. And while you're playing this Rouse card, you're also charging her up, because every single Rouse in this game gives a lot of Alienus to its owner. And her Exalt is very special compared to a lot of units, because it has multiple options for how it goes. Now that since we're in blue, it's Aequor, it's obviously going to be tentacle related. Specifically, her effect changes which tentacle stance she's in. So in blue stance, which is going to be the most common way you're going to be exalting on Miriam, it's going to apply poison to enemies and give you strength. And every time a blue character gives strength, that also gives tentacle damage. So blue Exalt is going to be some of your best, because it's going to be even more damage scaling, because it's plus strength. The other effects is when in white stance, you'll actually give aliens to the whole team. So there are times where you're just going to go into white stance to Exalt in order to fill out those bars on the other teammates if you truly need so. But it's not recommended, because then you're not scaling and you're also not gaining any strength. But sometimes you have to be in white stance. Sometimes you want that alien miss. It's perfectly reasonable to do it. Lastly, and this is only relevant if Miriam is on a poison comp, like a 24 or a G-Doll type comp, is she will just trigger 100% of the poison on all enemies if you're in red stance. So if you're in the Raging Waves Tentacle stance, and then Exalt with Miriam, it will trigger all the poison on an enemy, and you don't have to wait for their turn to proc it. Which also it can be is the most niche of the effects, but also can be the most relevant at times. Other than that, the only thing I failed to mention is that other than the 0 cost cards you get from her, she also generates 2 cards occasionally. A card called a Sacrament and a card called Obsession. One of her Enlightens, presumably her Enlighten 1. No. Interesting. Okay, so it's actually part of her base kit. But Miriam's base kit gives her an Obsession starts in your hand. And it's a card that gives her Alien Miss for free, but if you hold it in hand, change it to a Sacrament. And a Sacrament is a card that will give you 10% of your missing health back. And so you would think about it, usually you might want to hold on to the Obsession to transform it into a Sacrament and then have that healing. You never do that. Never. Never want to do that. Never, 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 never. Okay? If anything should be gathered from this video, it should be that. You never hold on to Obsessions. You always play an Obsession when you get it. Why? Simple. Its last line of text on the obsession reads, if you hold on to it, you get -1 draw for the turn. That is huge. That is huge in any game. -1 draw in a card game. It should not be understated how debilitating a debuff that is. So that's why you always play an Obsession when you get it, because of that debuff. And so that leads us to the final Awaker, who will be acquirable for free, potentially, if you want her, in 2 weeks, when Annie comes around, because she is an R2 Awaker. A banner will also be around for you to be able to pull for her, which is very important, because Corposant is a Enlighten 3 DPS. I cannot recommend this character before you get her up to Enlighten 3. Her Enlighten 3 is very important for how her kit performs. The only argument to be made is that she is useful as a shielder at Enlighten 2. If you don't want her as a DPS, Enlighten 2 makes sense, but she's a very powerful DPS, so I can only recommend her at Enlighten 3. And the reason why is because at Enlighten 2, her 2-cost card, which I'll explain in a minute, gives you a weakness effect and also increases her shielding. And so if you want her as a shielder, you need her to be at least at Enlighten 2, because you want weakness for any time you're trying to block damage, and more shield is obviously correct. But the reason why you want her as at Enlighten 3 for her full kit to actually function, because she's a DPS, is right here. All enemies vulnerable. She applies vulnerable when you exalt. She also gives you just temporary crit damage by 20% when you exalt. And obviously that is a very powerful and important effect as well. Just, 20% more crit damage is always going to be good. And so if you actually want to use her for damage, you're going to need her at Enlighten 3. So I can't recommend people picking her as your free Awaker, and I can't recommend you play her before line 3, but if you're willing to invest into her, I can assure you she pays it back in dividends. Why is that? Because her kit is basically the good version of a Rita kit. Her 2 most important cards that we'll see always are these 2 special cards, is her Ominous Semaphore, which applies the weakness earlier and gives a 0-cost card. A lot of her kit will generate the 0-cost card that is called a pilot that will give you shielding if you play it, or if you don't play it, you can discard for strength gain. I say, I'm of the opinion you just always play it out, because when you play it, you don't have an extra card in your deck. And almost always you just don't want extra cards in your deck, in my opinion. And so the Ominous F4 obviously is very important for charging up that Exalt, where all your damage is coming from, because of the vulnerable and the 20% crit damage. The Rouse will give you 2 pilots, so it has a lot of defensive stance, and it also allows you to get shield, like basically double your shield from White Stance when you enter White Stance, so that helps with the stalling to get up to that Exalt for damage. And same with these 2 cards, they just generate a lot of Alien Miss, because you get more Alien Miss on your cards when you discard. So why am I emphasizing having to Exalt so much? And why am I emphasizing having to stall so much? It's because her main DPS source is going to be the Lightning Retribution card. It is a 4-cost card that gets reduced every turn, and if you discard it, gets put back on your library. So if you discard it to the 2-cost Power of Friendship Arita card we discussed earlier, that discards and draws, if you discard it to the Encounter and White posse we just talked about earlier, which discards and draws, or with her Exalt, which not only applies the Vuln and crit damage, but also discards your hand and draws a new one, as well as give you temporary tentacles for damage. You'll every time you do that, it will put the card right on top, and then you'll draw back into it. So once you have this card in hand, you always have access into it until you play it. And each time you discard it, the cost is being reduced. And it just hits 5 times. So each one of those hits in red stance is proccing tentacle, and it increases at tentacle damage being taken in a turn. So you can make copies of this card to have insane value, where you're just blasting the mobs with a bunch of zero cost cards. And there's a lot of ways to make copies in this game. I don't need to go into the specifics here, but that is one way of playing her. You can also just use it as a big burst DPS and then hope the tentacles are enough if you're like a really strong team. Or you're commander with Arita, you play this lightning, it's set up for the Arita exalt damage to be extremely powerful. So even if she doesn't kill the mobs itself by spamming like multiple copies of lightning, she's still very powerful at setting up, because the crit damage is for all these different types of damage stacks. And the best way to play her, obviously, being with players like Orita and Tulu and Goliath, giving you those really powerful burst turns of tentacle damage. And so that is Aequor. I'll just summarize it all once again, but we have the Celeste and Sangas of the world that are and Murphys that are defensive units. Our Kykuses, who is a who is a Exalt Ball in endgame. I guess forgot to mention, but early on, this counter stacks he does are quite relevant for damage. Mobs will just kill you on the counter. And then we have Pharos as a draw for selection if you need it. And of course, the Tulus, the Corpos, the Goliaths, just big, big, big damage options. And overall, it's my favorite realm. I always recommend it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this was in some way informative. Once again, this is just meant to be a summary of how you play the cards and how you play the units available to you. In the future, I might make team comps that will showcase their power. In the future, I might go into deep in the depths of each character individually. But this video was just meant to be a simple summary guide, mostly meant for new players, on how each character functions, what Enlightens levels they want, etc., etc. Overall, I hope you all enjoyed, and hope you have a lovely day.